Welcome back to another episode of the Heatio Home Energy Show, and we are joined again by Paul, who has just talked us through his journey from electric vehicle charging to having solar installed, having battery installed, having an induction hob installed, and on this journey to having a fully electrified home, the home of the future, we called it before, but it's the home of the future that you can do right now. And in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit more around that final step in your journey to go from you've minimized your electricity consumption in one way, in terms of electricity consumption from the grid in one way by having solar installed. You've minimized the amount of fuel that you're buying from petrol stations by having an electric vehicle. But you still, I would imagine at this stage in your journey, you had this kind of looming gas consumption that kind of ran throughout the year.
Gas bill that was during the winter months was quite a lot.
And it's you mentioned that you had a combi boiler in the loft space.
Combi boiler in the loft space. The house would have had a system boiler when it was first built. Airing cupboard that we used. It's a modest house, hasn't got loads and loads of storage, and we make the most of all the space that we have. So the airing cupboard's pretty useful.
And this is fairly commonplace, isn't it? We're talking about 80% of homes on the gas network have a combi. If they're older homes, the space that would have had a tank in historically before the combi boilers were installed, they have been repurposed. You used it for storage. We've had plenty of people that have turned them into en-suites ensuite toilets or big storage spaces. Yeah, so
rooms.
They've been repurposed.
The space is no longer there.
Especially, I think, as we kind of maybe in an age now where people aren't necessarily moving home to create more space, they're maximizing the space that they've got, maybe putting extensions on and things like that. So you're in a situation where you didn't have somewhere to store hot water, which is a mandatory requirement for a heat pump, by the way, just so we don't think we're completely bonkers trying to squeeze this in.
We couldn't have gone to a heat pump without finding some way of storing hot water, and we had options. We could have put a tank in the loft, a horizontal tank, which with its problems, there's not a lot of height in the loft because of the design of the roof. So it would have been a horizontal tank in an unheated space, so less than desirable, not particularly nice to install for, and lots of compromises. So the airing cupboard that we had that would have had an old fashioned tank with a red jacket on it. The modern equivalent of that would have been to get it in the gap for the doorway. To get in there would have been a very tall, very thin tank, and it would have taken the whole cupboard up. So all of our storage space in that airing cupboard that we use for sheets and towels and other bits and pieces, that would have been gone. So we were looking at options to how to store enough hot water for us as a family to enable a heat pump to be installed with a minimal amount of extra plumbing, and I found Sunamp and phase change material hot water storage, which again appealed a bit to the inner geek because it's a bit different. Did a bit of digging and exploratory to what sort of size we could fit in there and physically what the impact of that would be in that cupboard, and found that we still retained all of our storage space that we use currently by having a Sunamp installed below the shelves.
And a Sunamp, for those who haven't come across it, is essentially a box that probably stands, I'm going to say about a metre tall, something around that. And it's a box that is essentially filled with a material that when you heat it up, it stays heated up for a long period of time. You can heat it up either by running a hot water through it from a heat pump or from a boiler for that matter. Yeah. But you can also heat it from an electric immersion, which can be used from solar.
Yes.
So this box stands much smaller than a traditional hot water cylinder.
I think they quote it's about a quarter of the volume for the equivalent hot water cylinder. So, say ours, because of the shape of the access to our airing cupboard, we had a really, really narrow doorway, and it all brick. So it wasn't an easy case of just knocking down a stud wall and rebuilding it afterwards. So we had to work within that narrow entrance, and we would have had a cylinder that was over 2 meters tall when it was fully done, and used the entire size of the cupboard to have enough storage space. The Sunamp is sits about a third of the height of the whole cupboard. It's quite a tall cupboard. And sits neatly underneath, along with all the rest of the other bits of the plumbing.
So it's going to be interesting here because we do get people. A lot of the time on this show, we have maybe people from industry coming on, telling everybody the benefits of a heat pump, for instance. So where we've talked about Sunamp in the past, we have people come on in the comments that say it doesn't work because it needs high temperature.
Wow.
So you've got a Sunamp.
I've got a Sunamp.
Does it work?
Yeah.
I've got a Sunamp and it works. So it's kind of like, if people want to go, these things don't work.
So that's 100% success rate.
Yes, in this room right now, 100% of the people that have had a Sunamp fitted in their home, it works.
There is a caveat in that with the choice of the heat pump that we had installed, it narrowed it down because we needed one that was capable of charging the Sunamp at the higher temperatures needed for the Sunamp to be charged.
And that's quite a critical thing, isn't it? Because one of the reasons why heat pumps and products like the Sunamp never really took off together was because the technology for quite some time has been heat pumps have struggled to reach higher temperatures.
Yeah.
But you've got the new Samsung HT high temperature quiet unit, HTQ.
Not so new now, but yes, it was. Yeah. It had just come out when we did it.
And that had the ability to reach the higher temperatures.
Yeah, it was the R32 HT quiet, and it reaches 65 degrees quite comfortably for hot water charging, which is what the Sunamp needs to charge it. And
the argument is going to be, well, when it's doing 65, it's going to be costing a fortune to run. You couldn't argue that if I had a cylinder that was the same size but ultra insulated and a full size copper cylinder, yes, it might be a little bit better on coefficient of performance at that time with lower temperatures, but we can charge it in the space that we have without putting it in the loft, which would have had higher losses, would have involved extra plumbing and pumping for the horizontal cylinder. So there is a compromise. There is an offset of one against the other. And for us, the simplicity of the Sunamp and the size of it, it was a no-brainer. It made it made it quick and easy to install. Yeah, and I suppose that's the thing is the minute you start then going down alternative routes, either you've got to compromise on the situation, or potentially you're spending more money installing in a different application. So that cost of installation, and I think this is sometimes things that they don't necessarily get discussed as part of the installation efficiencies, is the cost of the install would have probably been more expensive to put these things in the loft. Yeah. Or you'd have had to compromise on that space. And we would have lost, it's a small house, so loft storage is really important. It's all fully boarded, and we use our loft storage space a lot. It's how we keep the house clutter-free with suitcases and Christmas decks and seasonal clothes even. So having to put a big horizontal cylinder up there and blocking the access to half of the loft would have been a big problem for us. So you took the compromise. You run the Sunamps do need a slightly higher temperature than it runs. You don't really have much choice with the Samsung what temperature it, because it just works for a differential temperature. But when it's charging the Sunamp, it's usually around 65, just above, and we get an instant COP, if you want to be geeky about it, of about 2.2, which isn't as good as you could get with a standard water cylinder running at 45 degrees. But you also have the ability to charge that from solar. Yeah. So then your combined efficiencies and everything else. Exactly that. Yeah. It is actually when you consider the price that we're paying for electricity that's providing the heat pump, it's cheaper at the time. Yeah. I think that's the thing, is that if you're clever in the way you set these systems up, if you're using cheap electricity to heat the Sunamp, even though you're running at a higher temperature and your efficiencies are lower, it's still less than the blended rate. It doesn't matter at that point. And then you're topping up. You can top it up from solar. So actually, you could even charge it directly off the grid during those cheap periods if you wanted to. If you didn't want to run it through the heat pump, it wouldn't make much sense. It wouldn't make any sense because you've got the heat pump. But yes, you could. Yes, I think that argument sometimes gets lost. I think sometimes it's kind of like, how efficient is it going to be when it's heating my hot water? How efficient is it going to be when it's doing my heating? Rather than looking at this as saying, this is a complete household. The other thing with the Sunamp that's quite important is that if you're taking advantage of charging it during cheaper periods, is how long it holds onto that charge without losing it. Yeah. And the Sunamp's really well insulated. It's got vacuum panel insulation, so it holds a charge for a very long time. So you can charge it at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning with the heat pump, like I do, and get
granted, not particularly amazing COPs by some people's standards, but it costs much, much less. The FCOP, as Andrew Bissell would call it, the financial coefficient of performance is very preferential.
Yeah, it's a massive factor in it.
It's huge.
And I think it does get overlooked, I think, sometimes, because I think everyone's chasing these super efficient performance levels and efficiency levels. But actually, when you consider all of the factors, inclusive of smart tariffs, inclusive of solar generation, and the Sunamp is essentially a battery for the home. And it's such an important point that when we consider the lack of space in homes is pretty standard that we're in a situation where people don't have the space for a hot water cylinder.
I can see lots of people that wouldn't have been able to have a heat pump fitted because of the lack of space, being able to do it once they look at a Sunamp or potentially other options, but certainly the Sunamp is one that enables it for far more installation possibilities.
Where do you think, could you have put it outside?
We did. No, is the short answer. Not easily. That the house is it's quite a small back garden. It's got a garage on the side of it, and the boundary of the property is effectively right on the outside of the garage. So we don't really have any space. We could have put it in the garage and replumbed everything, but that's again losing garage space and quite long pipe runs and all the losses associated with putting it somewhere that isn't heated.
Understood. Okay.
So the easy option was Sunamp. Where the original cylinder was, the pipework was already there. It's where all the pipework had to be hooked up for the central heating anyway. So there was already connections going to be made there. So it didn't need G3 for a main cylinder.
That's it. That is
another advantage.
Yeah. So for those who haven't come across it, so G3 regs essentially means that you have to have the ability that if for any reason there's a fault in the system, that it needs to discharge the water that's inside it to outside, because Sunamps don't store that much hot water inside of it.
Tiny volume inside it, just the pipework.
And it's because it's essentially running like a combi boiler. You have a coil inside that the cold water comes in, picks up the heat from the material, and then comes out the other side.
Exactly. Yeah, the water you actually get, the hot water you're getting out, effectively was cold only seconds before. It's not stored as cold as hot water.
So you only need a tiny little expansion vessel.
Exactly. Yeah, it's it's about the size of a pint glass. Yeah, a little expansion vessel. Again, saving space. And because you're not storing the volume of water as hot water, you don't need all the extra plumbing and safety regs.
We had some customers. We had a lot of customers contact us wanting a Sunamp fitted in isolation, just wanting the Sunamp on home. Still got a gas boiler. Still planning on having a gas boiler, and we found that because if you installed the Sunamp as part of a heat pump installation, not only do you get the £7,500 grant towards it, but it's also zero rated on the VAT.
Yeah.
So the cost, we've had people we've quoted them, the cost to have a Sunamp fitted is actually the same cost as it is to have a Sunamp, a heat pump.
It's a gateway to a heat pump.
Yeah. It's literally, and if you're going for it, the amount of people that we've had contact us just interested in having a Sunamp fitted, and then when we've given them the quote to have the Sunamp heat pump and a couple of radiators upgraded, the total cost is the same as it would have been just to fit the Sunamp on its own.
Yeah, I can believe it.
So so we've got the Sunamp in place.
So Sunamp solved our space problem.
Yeah.
That then meant it did limit our choices on heat pumps, but that choice is getting bigger and bigger. But at the time we went, there was only a handful of things on the market that could do the higher temperature.
I think now you'd struggle to find a manufacturer that doesn't have a high temperature now. Yeah.
But and when we first looked at it and we started to look at the project of replacing with a heat pump, the Samsung HT Quiet was one of, I think, 2 or 3 that we could have bought that would have done the job for the size that we needed. So we went for the Samsung. Great bit of kit. It's a monster. It's a monster. Yeah. They had to use a lift to get it up. It went on brackets on the side of the house on top of our garage roof.
Oh, you've put it at a high level as well.
Yeah, it's at high level, easily accessible, but it's at high level. So it wouldn't have been an octopus install.
No,
because that would have been a no-no. But yeah, it's been great. We've had it went in end of last August. So we've had a whole heating season with it. So we know how it works from a running perspective, and it's been really good.
And in terms of that journey to go on, because this is something we've touched on quite a few times in this show, and I think, I don't know whether we're positioning Heatio to be hated by both gas engineers and heat pump engineers, but essentially we're saying, like, in that scenario, you mentioned it earlier, you had somebody come in and they told you, right, first thing you need to do is replace every radiator in your house.
Yeah, we were, because we were on this trial for vehicle to grid, it opened us up to a few more trials, and we got invited to participate in a heat pump trial. As part of that, they came out and did an assessment of the house, did all the calculations for installing it, and said effectively that every radiator in our house needed to be replaced with a bigger radiator at pretty considerable cost. What I did is, prior to our heat pump installation, I hooked up our old gas boiler with using it was a glowworm, so it's Valent eBus system. Hooked it up to Home Assistant, put a few temperature sensors around the house, and effectively watched it for a heating season to see what sort of flow rates we were getting, or flow temperatures we were getting. Knocked the temperature back to 50 degrees for the heating circuit, and we lived with it. Didn't tell the wife. And so I got a genuine reaction if the house was going to be too cold. And to be honest, it wasn't. Despite being previously told that we needed to replace all the radiators, all of the radiators in the house were more than capable of maintaining the temperature in the house, which I know is not enough in its own, but we didn't have a cold house. It did allow me to look at the radiators that could have been improved upon, and we changed, in the end, the heat pump installation, we only changed 4 radiators. Out of 13 in total. So a big difference between changing them all to changing the ones that needed changing.
But I think there's a massive factor in there where, in order to, in that journey to having a heat pump fitted, you've gone through this assessment, and it's a very detailed assessment. It's somebody that comes to the house and they measure every single room in the property, and they measure your windows and they measure your door openings. And you think this is, for somebody to go to that level of detail, you're probably going to believe what's in the report.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is that so much of that information, bar maybe the dimensions of your house, is complete guesswork.
Lots of assumptive calculations on the fabric of the building, air change rates.
All of which are erring on the side of caution.
Yeah.
All of which ultimately end up in a situation where, when people talk about how expensive it is to have a heat pump installed, it's because we're adding all these excess factors to the calculations that mean that you end up positioned as...
The trouble is, you add up all the excess factors together, and you suddenly end up with a system that's like probably 40%, 50% more than it needed to be in reality.
And by just doing that thing, dropping the 50 degrees back. Now, you have also got to find an installer who is willing to work with you on this, because if they just do it by the book and by those calculations, and that spits out that 100% of the radiators need to be upgraded, that's what they're going to tell you. And if you don't like it, then you're not going to have the installation.
100%. I was very lucky that one of my customers is a ground source installer. They're a company that do ground source primarily, Nichols ball holes. So they were more than capable and equipped of dealing with air source heat pumps, and they were MCS accredited for it, and they worked with me, and they ended up fitting the system for me. But they were very accommodating to my slightly unusual needs, maybe from a customer perspective, but they did that for me. And they effectively enabled me to fit it with the minimal number of upgrades. From a radiator perspective, they happily went with the Sunamp. They'd never fitted one before. They were intrigued and quite surprised how good it was. And we ended up with a working system with a minimal fuss, minimal number of upgrades, relatively minimal cost. We could have gone for potentially cheaper systems if we'd had the space. If we'd opted for a standard tank and a cheaper heat pump, for example, we could have gone. We could have got a slightly cheaper system, but would have lost that storage space.
I think that's the thing. Is it actually, when you take all those parts together, the fact that if somebody had come in and said you're going to have to rip out all your radiators and replace them all, it would have probably been a no.
Reality is it would have been very difficult to make that decision.
And if you would have had to give up all that space in your storage space, possibly another no. So when you take those factors together and you say, actually, you've proven through dropping your temperature down on your boiler, and it's another thing that we'd encourage people to do is, register on the platform, get your smart meter data, and do that. Turn that temperature down on the boiler down to 50 degrees and see the difference.
Smart meter data is key. I mean, we signed up for historical smart meter data through Hildebrand. Obviously, that was a few years ago now. Now you can use the Heatio platform. But getting that smart meter data means that you can see what your gas consumption is on a particularly cold day, or look at averages over periods of time. And having that just allows you to make a much more informed decision. And you can do some pretty crude maths and work out what your heat pump rating needs to be or a rough idea of what your heat pump rating needs to be, and it works.
Yeah. And we do that for Build Now. It's completely free of charge. We offer that service. You connect onto the platform, you can visualize your smart meter data. You can fill out a property survey form now as well, and we'll then do that calculation to what we think the heat pump size should be based on how the property's performed thermally with the amount of energy consumed. But I think a key part in that journey, and we encourage people to do it, is if you take the 10th of December, for instance, and you've consumed X amount of kilowatt hours of gas, and then at 1 minute past midnight, you turn the boiler temperature down to 50 degrees, and you see how it performs the next day, without paying anything at all, you will reduce your running costs, and you will also find out whether or not your home is insulated well enough to be able to perform at that. Worst case scenario, if you find that it isn't, then you turn the temperature up the next day.
It costs you nothing to do that test.
Yeah, and
we did it for a whole winter.
That's what Graham Hendry, I think he used the term. It's a heat pump, free heat pump trial.
Free heat pump. Well, that was used by a few people in the process. When we had Octopus come out before we went down the route that we did, and it was that conversation came up saying I've been trying it at 50 degrees, and again they didn't do, because it was high mounted at the time. They didn't do those installations, but they said the same thing. It's a free heat pump trial by setting your boiler at a lower temperature. Yeah. And we live with it. We live with the temperatures that were achievable by 95% of the heat pumps available on the market under 50 degrees, and we knew by the end of that winter which rooms probably needed extra help. And again, when we get into some of the kind of cost parameters around this, if you found those radiators that needed a little bit of extra help, and you bundle that within a heat pump installation, there is a conversation around the benefits of VAT and the fact that you could save a bit. But a lot of the time, the day rates that you're paying heat pump engineers, due to the complexity of heat pump installations, tends to be quite a lot higher than you would pay somebody to come around and swap your radiators. Yeah, you could pay your local plumber to come that you've known before, you got a relationship with, come and change the radiators that you know are an issue. Yeah. Do that before you have the heat pump fitted.
And that's all in this preamble, isn't it? All in this build up to, let's say, becoming heat pump ready is probably the term that's used. Even if you aren't thinking about having a heat pump, actually, you can do certain things in your home, like getting that visibility for smart meter data, like upgrading your electricity supply to your home, like turning your boiler temperature down. These are all things that you can do that will enable you to access these benefits in the future, but they will also save you money right now.
Yeah, immediately. Yeah. Turn your volume. Turn your volume. Turn the flow temperature down on your boiler if it's the right type of boiler to do some digging first. But turn the flow temperature down and live with it. Yeah, and then you have a much better idea. It's also different when you turn the flow temperature down. You don't get that sort of hot cold cycle throughout the day. I was discussing it with my wife last night. Is that what the big changes you've seen since we've done what we've done? And she said, I don't feel cold. I don't sit at home and feel cold, because the walls, if you whack your radiators up to maximum when you get home from work and they're pumping it out at 70, 80 degrees, the radiators are warm, the air around it's warm, but the walls are still cold. Yeah. And you sit there and you feel cold. It's exactly the same temperature if you measured it with a thermometer, but it feels cold. Yeah. When you're heating it at a steady, slow, comfortable rate, you don't get that, because the whole building gets comfortably warm. You don't have those cold spots.
It stays in that warmth as well. I think a lot of people they literally turn their heating off when when they go out, and then they turn it on again when they come home. And actually, just adopting that kind of setback temperatures and maybe even investing in a smart thermostat just to control it during those periods. All of these things can be done in advance of making a leap to having a heat pump. But you've also then, as I say, and you've got the benefit there of an installer who's willing to say, regardless of what the calculations come out with, the argument should be, well, the input into the calculations is wrong then, because my home is telling me it's this. And you do have the ability within those calculations to go in and challenge some of that stuff.
You have to provide evidence, and that's the issue. It's an easier option to follow the guidance. Mm-hmm. The MCS guidance says, this is what you do. And if you follow it, you've covered yourself. Yeah. You've not taken a risk. because you've done it exactly what the guide. If you want to change it deviate from that guidance, you have to be able to put your neck on the line and say, this is what we're going to do instead.
And they are actually, there's one of the ways we found as a workaround for this is we've had customers come to us, done exactly the same journey as you. I've put it in, I've ran my home at 50 degrees. We put in the information into the calculations and it says, well, regardless of what you're telling us, at 50 degrees, the calculations are telling us that your house will not get warm. So we have an honest conversation and say, right, okay, what about if we put the calculations in and say we're going to run this at 65 degrees? Which is, you can do within the MCS calculations, you can put it in and say, I'm going to run this at 65. If you're using a heat pump or anything like that, so as long as the heat pump is registered on the MCS with test data of up to 65. Yeah. And I think you've got to achieve a 280% efficiency. So maybe it's like 63 degrees or something with the Samsung HTQ, the high temperature one. You can put it in 65. And then all of a sudden, all your radiators go green and it says everything works.
That's pretty much what we ended up with. We kind of took a punt on it and made it work with a bit of collaboration with the design engineer, was to produce a design that would comply with MCS. I think it ended up that the figures were like 51 or 52 degrees as flow temperature for design outside temperature. With what we had was everything was be matched and work fine. In reality, last winter it never got above 48, which is the right side.
Yeah.
We haven't got any cold rooms, and it's cheaper to run than it would have been.
So sometimes you do have to kind of, it's about the installers and the customer kind of engaging on that basis, isn't it? Because actually, if the installer's going in and saying, I only design systems at 35 degrees, and that is which is at the same time, you're going to say fair to the installers. If that's their design, that's how they want to design systems, then it's not necessarily up to the customer to overrule that, because it's their, I suppose it's their
choice to accept that quote or not.
Exactly, yeah. And if the installer says, this is how I do things, then that's absolutely fine. But we do need more installers who are willing to work with the customer on the way through.
We a bit like the vehicle to grid, a bit taking part and things like that. It was kind of our ethos as a family, if you like, to try and do our bit and be a bit greener and a bit more aware of this. And we wanted to prove that you could fit a heat pump with minimal disruption, or there's always going to be compromise. There's always going to be some work and dust and mess, but minimal disruption, minimise the extra cost, and it work, and it be a better alternative to replacing the gas boiler like for like with another gas boiler. And I think we've done that.
Well, when you consider all the other factors that have gone on in your journey as well, because ultimately what you're getting to, and I'm assuming this is the next stage is you've stopped using gas.
Yeah, we have no gas.
And you actually went to the extent of having the gas meter removed completely.
Quicker than we expected. We got the date for the heat pump installation, and expecting it to take a long time to get the gas disconnected. So, I'll phone up and get the appointment to get it disconnected. Yeah, 3 days later, they came out and disconnected the gas.
Before you had the heat pump?
Before the heat pump installation was finished. It was midway through. So it was, at that point, no going back, no hot water unless it was done. It was August, so we weren't going to get cold. But there was no hot water, and that's a deal breaker for me. I need a shower in the morning.
And I suppose the benefit with the Sunamp is you've got the electric connection directly into it, so
right.
You could get it.
And that's what happened.
Yeah.
We had electric connection for a few days while the rest of it was being fitted, but we didn't lose hot water for more than a day.
Actually, it just reminds me of a story. We had a client who came through to us. Boiler broken down. It was May, June. A boiler had broken down. We went and did the assessment, interested in having a heat pump, needed the network connection upgrading, and spoke to the network. They said that it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks, somebody's going to come out and make that upgrade. And he was like, well, I can wait, I don't need heating until September, October time, but I can't wait that long for hot water. So we went and fitted we had a Sunamp that we kind of had as a unit that sits there as a bit of a backup for us. We took that to the property. We installed it just for hot water purposes only. Just ran it on immersion. They already had solar and battery.
Oh, there you go.
And we got the hot water back on within 24 hours, and then waited for the upgrades and get the confirmation to actually be able to connect the heat pump into the system.
Perfect.
Well, that's it. So you've now gone to a position where so actually you had your gas disconnected before you even had
before we had a working heating system, but life's fun. Yes, nothing like a challenge, is there? So we had to make it work. Had to overcome. The reality is the heat pump install itself was pretty streamlined, pretty straightforward, and it went well.
But we're talking fine margins with some of these things, but when we're going to get onto smart tariffs and what this means in terms of your running costs. But by having that gas meter removed, my understanding that's saved you money on itself.
With Octopus, though, I don't know if it's the same for all. I've heard some other stories, but with Octopus, as soon as you inform them that you want the meter removed, they stop charging you a standing charge. So immediately, it was saving us at the time, I think, £160 a year just by not having the gas connection that we no longer needed.
Another step, and so you're not paying those, because what you're paying for with that £165 is not just the meter; it's a percentage of the network costs and everything that comes with it. So you've invested here, and you get that back. So now you're completely electric for everything in your home. You've got no choice of going back.
So we've now got a house in pieces with no gas boiler, no gas meter, a pipe hanging out the ground with a cap on it saying that you're no longer connected to the gas network. And an interesting few days, but it all came together. It was fine.
And you've actually, so now you've gone through a winter period. You've had the heat pump running with the solar. So you've done a 12-month period. And I think this is one of the points, and I hope the people watching this, when they talk about the negativities around not just around heat pump systems, but these whole systems in general, we get to this place where you still pay a monthly fuel bill.
Yeah.
But that monthly fuel bill now is quite different to how it used to be, where it was made up of your gas price, standing charges, electricity price, standing charges. You've brought in a smart tariff to kind of support this. And just talk a little bit, what does that smart tariff look like for you?
So, you're quite right. We had a gas bill with standing charge, electricity bill with, at the time, because we had the electric vehicle, we were on Octopus Go. So there was a cheap 4-hour period at night. And depending on whether it was winter or summer, we would use it in a slightly different way in terms of the batteries and how you charge them. When we had a slightly higher consumption with a heat pump, that, to be honest, winter usage for the heat pump on Octopus Go with just the 4 hours, we were struggling to make it work with the small 4-hour period of off peak. But we still got an average of 13.5 pence per kilowatt hour, which is very good when you combine that with the efficiency of a heat pump. But we could have done better, and we could do better. So we tried Agile for a period of time, and that involved quite a lot of automation to make sure that everything was being used when the rates were cheap, and minimise the use of it when the rates were high. In the end, with the equipment we've got and the slightly non-professional way it's all connected, it was a bit of a headache to try and make it work in such a fluid way. So we've now gone back to Octopus Intelligent. Octopus Intelligent gives us that longer, cheaper period, and it gives us access to a better export rate. So we get paid 15 pence per kilowatt hour that we export back to the grid, and we pay 7.5 pence per kilowatt during the off-peak period.
What is that off-peak period?
It is 11:30 to 5:30, so 6 hours.
So decent.
Yeah, chunk. So 2 hours extra compared to Go, and at a cheaper rate. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, it opens up the higher export rate for us. We went from an export rate of 8 to 15 pence a kilowatt hour. And that completely flips everything on its head in terms of whether it's preferential to export or use power when we're generating it, which is now how we operate.
So is that, I guess that must be close to putting you in a position where you'd actually just export everything.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. Winter or summer, the strategy pretty much is export whatever we generate gets exported, because we've got enough storage between the car with the vehicle to grid and then our on-site 10 kilowatt hour solar edge battery.
So you charge the battery from the cheap electricity?
Yeah, both the car and the battery gets charged overnight at 7.5 pence, irrespective of whether the sun's going to shine all day the following day or not.
Wow.
Because whatever we export, we get paid more than we paid for the charging the batteries in the first place.
It's really interesting, actually, because it's probably not in the true spirit of how this thing's going to be in the future. No, completely not. But it's what's available right now, and I guess it helps probably to pay for things. Exactly, and that's probably it's probably a big motivator for people to get onto this now. If you were thinking, anybody who's watching this that's at that stage of the journey right at the start, maybe thinking about connecting up to Heatio to see their energy usage, the end position starts to become a little bit more attractive if those if those export tariffs are in place.
Using the sort of the return on investment style analogy that people like to use, it does mean that you have a payback period.
Yeah,
it will pay for itself eventually.
And why shouldn't you get paid for that? I suppose because the alternative is to pay fossil fuel power stations to generate it, pay wind developers to generate it, solar developers to generate it. Why, if you're...
Or even worse, the wind generators to turn off.
Yeah.
Because the grid can't deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's a travesty.
And that's not happening at a domestic level, is it? No. So you've put the solar on your roof. If you want to export every single kilowatt hour that it generates into the grid, you are going to get paid 15 pence.
15 pence per kilowatt hour for everything that we export. So we do... we do have a conscience. Yeah. We do have a conscience, and we do try and export as much as we can during periods that we know are high grid intensity, and some of that's automated, so that it does export. If there's a surplus of power in the car, surplus of power in the battery, and we're going to end up with enough to keep us going through to the next cheap period, we'll export it, and we export it when the grid intensity is highest.
And that's because in the periods where you are importing into your battery or into your EV, because people would probably turn around and say, well, hang on, you're getting 15 pence, but it costs you 30 pence to buy the electricity. But actually you're saying during the periods of the day where you're getting the off-peak electricity, you're charging your battery from the grid.
Yeah.
You're charging your car from the grid. Mm-hmm. So you're in a position where you're only paying 7 pence for those periods. So actually it makes complete sense that actually when you're generating, why would you not sell it back?
Yeah, it isn't the answer long term, but it is what it is now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, what we as part of that, we choose to try and keep our exports, if we can, to a period when it really just does genuinely help the grid out. Again, from a bit of our experience of when we had the vehicle to grid trial, we know when the grid needs help, needs assistance. So we try and do that and export during that period of 4 to 7 when the grid is stressed at its highest, and when that would result in more carbon being emitted as for more power generation, plants having to come online and try and help.
I mean, to fall into the category of, I think sometimes the terminology is banded around a bit, but they call it the early adopter.
Yeah.
And I think it's the innovator, it's the somebody who's got that drive to go on and do this, which you and your family absolutely have, to have gone on this journey. And it is the family. Every single person in that household has to buy into this, because whether you're leading it from a tech perspective and maybe you're the one monitoring the graphs, there's compromise right the way through the family in terms of adopting the journey and the willingness to maybe be one of those first people that are doing this. And actually, it's one thing if you've lived in a house with all this technology before and you move into a new one, but when somebody starts telling you, I'm going to rip out that boiler, I'm going to fit this heat pump, and don't worry, we'll still have plenty of hot water. There's a faith.
There's a huge faith. And yeah, my wife's been very accommodating towards that, but she trusts me that I wouldn't deliberately be trying to set us up to fail. No,
and you've obviously done the research on the way through.
Lots of research
to get there.
That's what sort of built. That's the stepping. Each time we've done a stepping stone of a new addition to the house or our lifestyle from that point of view, from cars. I've looked at it first. I haven't just jumped in and done it. What are the options and how's that going to benefit us, and what's it going to be a problem? What problems are going to come up, and when we go for that route?
You've gone to, and that to me is, I think the term early adopter can kind of take away from it a little bit, because it sounds like, crazy scientists that they're working this thing out. But actually it's...
Some of it is.
Yeah, it's got to be. You have to...
Some of it is very Heath Robinson, because you can't buy it.
But you're the innovators in this space, because actually people like yourselves enable people like us to be able to go on, like companies like Heatio and others that are in this journey. We've got to take the learnings from people like you who have gone through this to enable it for the next generation of people who probably won't want to spend as much of that time. It's something they might want to do, but they haven't necessarily got the time nor the inclination to go and do some of that stuff.
It's exactly what I would have wanted at the beginning, is that I could go and buy a box or subscribe to a platform that did all of the thousands of hours that I've spent doing what I've done with our system.
What do you think is that if you were going to leave us with two things? I mean, we haven't touched on cost associated to some of this stuff. But let's put out, it's probably the elephant in the room, because I can imagine if you're watching this, you're thinking, right, okay, so how do you know what you've spent to get here?
I mean, it's probably not all in. A fair chunk. I mean, the heat pump installation was, I think, was about an extra 4,000 on top of the bus grant, with all the work that had to be done, which I don't think is unreasonable for.
No.
It's certainly no more than a gas boiler. A decent gas boiler would have been. The solar system cost us 6. The battery cost us about 6, because it wasn't done at the time of installation. It had VAT on it, which was a bit frustrating.
Yeah, very.
That was a kick.
I think that one is in the throes of being changed. But you're probably all in. You're going to be somewhere close to 15,000, 16,000.
Yeah, something. I mean, I think everything that we've done, including insulation upgrades and a few bits on the way, we've probably spent 20,000 in total.
And when you can, for absolutely understandably, for the majority of people, when they're sat there looking at this and going, £20,000, when we talk about that kind of financial coefficient of performance,
it's over 5 years.
Yeah,
we didn't do it. We couldn't afford to do it in one go. It's been spread out, and it's been done, I think, reasonably logically in terms of the steps.
But if you think you've gone, and this is something we're working on under what's called Energy as a Service. So it's a pilot that goes live in the next few weeks in partnership with E.ON. And the aim there is to say to somebody like yourself, right, rather than you spending all that money up front, we can put all that equipment into your home and you pay a monthly rental fee essentially for that equipment. Somewhere around £90 to £100 a month.
I'll just snap their hands off.
Yeah. And you see this huge reduction in your energy bills. You get to benefit from all of these things that come alongside it. And obviously, because it's tied to a long-term service agreement, responsibility for making sure that these things all sing and hum and dance together all works. So that one of the big challenges is avoiding that upfront capital cost and or even spread it. Because to some people, that is just an insurmountable barrier. It's not something that people can get over.
I mean, we've been lucky in that we've done it in stages and it's been fairly organic. But you can't just go to a high street lender and get cheap finance or a preferential rate on your mortgage if you're adopting these technologies. Effectively, it's a personal loan is your only option. And that is a big drawback for someone that wants to do it but hasn't got the cash to do it. Most people don't have that kind of cash floating around. And I think that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks. You solve two problems by having energy as a service. You solve the guaranteed performance issue, which takes away that element of doubt and worry about whether it's going to do the job it needs to do. And you also solve the finance problem at the same time. So
those two
if someone had said that to me at the beginning, I'd have been pretty pro that.
Because you've got. I think as an industry, we've got to find a way of backing up what we're trying to sell.
Yeah.
Because if we say to a customer, this thing's going to be amazing, you're going to save money on your energy bills, you're going to get off the gas network, it's going to meet your heating demands in your home, and it's going to be cheaper for you to run.
But without the requirement to change every radiator in your house and the biggest hot water cylinder running at 45 degrees, you still got to have a living house and you still got to have minimal disruption.
I think that's got to be then. It's another point around kind of compromise and confidence. Is if they say, well, I don't really want every radiator upgrade, and we say, okay, well, your savings is slightly different, not as good, but we're still going to be able to stand behind that. Your hot water, because we're not putting in that massive tank, or what if I run out of hot water, we stand behind that. Yeah. And if as an industry, if we're not willing to design a system that we stand behind, how the hell can we expect a customer to hand over £20,000 to us?
That's exactly right.
If you're willing to make the margin on the installations and the supply and the technology, and you want volume, which we're not talking about kind of installation companies in specific regions. We're talking about mass adoption of this technology across the UK.
27 million homes.
Yeah. We've got to be able to design these systems. We've got to stand behind them. We've got to have lender confidence that the system designs and specifications that we're doing, when we combine all these technologies together, that they will stand the test of time, which means manufacturers have to engage in that journey with us, because they need to be able to warranty that technology for prolonged periods of time. But actually, when you bring all those things together and you get economies of scale, supported by innovative tariffs that go alongside it, then you should be in a position where you can take that to a homeowner and say, look, this is a hassle-free solution, a monthly subscription fee that makes the whole thing work. And I genuinely think with energy as a service, we're very, very close to achieving that point.
It effectively pays for itself.
Yeah.
If you're putting all these technologies and making them work at their most efficient together, the savings that you're generating are effectively paying for the technology to be fitted.
That's what it's got to be, hasn't it? And then you have the additional incentives that come down the line with...
You haven't got the risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. If that option was on the cards 5 years ago, I would have done it.
Hear that? So if you're thinking,
and it would have saved myself a lot of grief
and time. You'd have
all the time.
Think of the holidays you could have had.
Couldn't afford them. Spent it on other things. But yeah, for someone to be able to integrate these technologies together to be as financially efficient as well as energy efficient and produce the savings to pay for themselves would have been, that's what I've been trying to achieve for 5 years. And a lot of time has been put into it. Not masses and masses of money to make it integrated, but it is time. And at the end of the day, it's a DIY, not so stable system with a few circuit boards and a bit of solder that I've done in various places to make it work. But it does, it highlights what you can be achieved if you can integrate systems in a complementary way. You can make the most out of them and you can make them pay for themselves quicker and better and optimize their efficiency and carbon. Even when we have carbon on the grid, eventually we'll be net zero. It won't be an issue. Yeah. But everything we can do to minimize the demand we're putting on the grid and try and minimize the demand when it's bad for the grid to have it, like the evening peak at the moment, and shift loads to areas where it's desirable, then we should do that. We should be doing that all the time.
Yeah.
And the grid needs to, or the policy and the grid needs to help that happen for consumers and facilitate that for platforms to allow consumers to take part in that. And we can all be part of the problem, as well as or part of the solution, as well as the problem. Yeah. And that's how I'd like to see it. And then 10 years time, this should be normal. Yeah. It should just works.
And you wouldn't have had to do all this.
I wouldn't have had to do all this, and you wouldn't be telling me how fantastic and unique and perfect this system is, because it's just the way everything does.
Yeah,
it just does it without you thinking about it. But I think we have a long way to go.
We do, unfortunately, but we're working on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for listening to me for so long.
No, it's people like you are driving this forward, and they keep companies like us honest as well. We've got to take what you've done, the learnings what you've done, and we've got to apply it and make it into real world situations where lots of households can adopt this without too much hassle. That's the next stage in the journey before we get into people building houses with this stuff already built into it. But thank you very much for joining us, Paul. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching, and join us again on the Heatio Home Energy Show.